Hi, everybody. Today you have Deb Merchant and Tantra Mott. Deb Merchant are the Vital Psyche. They're in the world playing ground. Tantra Mott, Awaken Your Being, are in the world playing ground. A lot has happened before this particular event, and I'm going to highlight a few aspects of that before we get into as we get into the meat of this call, I guess is what I want to say.
It's part of it, yeah.
Yeah, it is part of it. And one of the things that we have learned in all the years of our being together, Deb and I specifically, and then the global community that comes for a short time, some people, and comes for a long time, some people. But what we've learned about our existence is that when people come together, a kind of synchronicity, kind of convergence starts to happen, kind of coherence, cohesion, things start to make sense because we've all come together, not because there's this inanimate truth out there that we're separated from, we're searching to find. Truth rises in human beings' shared experience of what they want life to be. So miraculously or crazily, I was on Asana, which is a task management system, and I somehow sent out the original letter. Debbie might want to mute. We're coughing. I sent out an original template letter that we wanted to have people have visible to them before to understand Create a World. So eventually what I'm about to read will be what we call a landing page, just for people to get the context of what Create a World is. So Deb took it seriously. It was last May, and she did the thing I'd been asking for, which she edited the letter into a 5-minute letter for people to read on the landing page of what will be the Create a World landing page. And I was so moved by it, and it was so appropriate to Deb's and my conversation today that I said, okay, well, we're going to start with that letter. So, for Deb and I, and for the other collaborators and Create a World, it is a pleasure to be in your company. We don't have to meet you or know you. It doesn't require that. We have one thing in common. We're human beings. And we live on this planet together, which makes us an indigenous people of community, regardless of our race, color, creed, or even positions or politically or otherwise in life. And to create a world, we need everyone paying attention to the world they want. The diversity will happen naturally. The who loves what will happen naturally. We just don't have to kill each other over it anymore or kill ourselves. So here's the letter. And thank you for your company today and the pleasure of your company. Welcome to Create a World. We're happy to have you on this journey with us today. Create a World came to life through magical means, through a discovery that there is something rising everywhere. I'm Tantra Mott. I'm a mystic and a prophetess. A mystic sees or is present to things others may not be paying attention to. And a prophetess calls out, a she that calls out what should be paid attention to in order not to miss something important. That's really the mystical foundation of how Create a World started to formulate in our shared psyches, the psyche meaning the mind of our soul. In my work with clients and collaborators, I found universal truths. Actually, in our work with clients and with each other, we found universal truths. Inequality, like age or education, is a contribution in value. The social structures which once limited definitions of value and contribution are disintegrating if they're not already gone. 2, instead of limiting our capabilities, we can instead embrace that reality. All kinds of reality are colorful and comes in all sizes and shape to be enjoyed, not be used to destroy. many of us are having experiences of noticing the common way of things seems to be shifting, as if there are other types of realities rising. And we're needed to help those realities embody, each where we're standing. This way, this thing Deb talks about redaction, we don't get redacted into just small, narrow corridors that give us no ability to color outside the lines. In Create a World, we will explore how one knows how to contribute to and how to identify new realities rising. But we won't explore it as if myself and the collaborators know it all. We don't. It's why we're doing this, as a matter of fact, because in your shared energy and our shared field, this really amazing consciousness that we actually share, we just get positional in the consciousness, but we all share the need to be loved and love, the need to be healthy, the need to be not at the effect of survival, the need to learn, the need to express ourselves creatively. We all have this. It's what we have in common. And to find that common ground with no need to separate ourselves from ourselves, that's magic. That's truly magic. Certain aspects we're aware of based on many things we've all been observing for quite a while, such as there seems to be a calling for collaboration and a collective definition, a new collective definition of humanity. However, we need to include what you're observing. That's why we invited you here. We invited you here to observe and be your own thinker and to be in your own perception and to see what's different about what you see and what we say and what resonates. It's not about agreeing. It's about stimulating the creative process of engagement, wherein in that stimulated process of engagement, we do create a world. We can't help it. We don't have to apply ourselves. We don't have to go into action. Our very nature of how we move around begins to change. We begin to reflect. We begin to become immersive in our own dialogue, within a monologue, within our own head. And we begin to notice in a larger field of shared experience, we gather a synthesis of information, and we begin to move forward with that synthesis. It is so cool. What does it mean to observe anyway? How does one help really embody? How do you become present to what's important to you, what's yours to do, be, and have, and stand in the value of that? Throughout history, people gathered in various ways, either discover the next movements of their reality or put their own awareness into motion. Talking around a fire, marches, demonstrations, barn raisings, quilting bees, PTAs, and even military debriefs are a few examples. These are some ways we listen for and sing the songs wanting to be sung. It's important to us as we chat with each other that somehow you get in touch with what is yours. In the collective field of Tantra Mat, where Create a World originated, but is not limited to, we found ourselves in conversations out of the past. We found ourselves in conversations out past the present border of what can be put into words, into conclusions, or even patterns. That's why we're here. We don't have a private agenda. We do not have a script, except for this letter that Deb did that I am busy embellishing upon. We come to be real human beings, really examining our existence and really examining existence itself. You could say that we as human beings have become the philosophers, the perceivers, the explorers, the discoverers of the new frameworks of the human mind within which we all share space. And that's what our Create a World show aims to do. Bring us all together, human beings and forces of creation. You can't help that having a mystic on board, to discover the words, the language of what is rising, to sing the new songs, to live in new ways, and to perhaps restore the paradigms of what might be called paradise. Those are my words, the words of Tantra Mat. The restoration calls for reclaiming humanity as a collective event, where everything is part of everything else, and we are all part of each other. This is very different from realities that have dominated more recent human experience. It matters that we engage in conversation as a collaborative, collective field, each in our own unique way. Being community for a moment or for a lifetime is the foundation for which these conversations rise. There are many who've been living this way or calling it back into existence across the ages. We're just adding our voice to theirs through Create a World. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to know it all now. That's not even possible at this point. It's one of the challenges we have. We all have our businesses. We all have what we're interested in and committed to and contributing to life. But we're really working to get together, those of us that are the main kind of headstone of the collaboration, to see if we can really come on here as just humans, living our own reality, existing in our own, what we've experienced, not just what we have learned to parrot or learn to believe, but actually what we have been experiencing. Very, very critical and very important. It's been amazing to me how many people no longer share because somebody will say, well, that's not true. Well, it is true for the person sharing. And we need to remember that all truths make a kaleidoscope of beauty called the world. So today, Deb and I, one of our best friends, is going into surgery. We're on the verge of tears because we love her and care about her. And I'm in her house and I'm doing this from her house. And as Deb said earlier, and she'll expound on that, it's all part of Create a World. It's real time. Philosophy was never meant to be a process of just having thoughts that you can live between your ears about. Philosophy was to give life meaning, to give life flavor, to make it a rich, wholesome, beautiful, confronting, alive, challenging experience. And if we can recover that, if we can get back on our feet about that, that's pretty bloody cool. Now I'm going to use Deb's words. We don't have to observe. We just have to observe, explore, and be opened up and to discover. And most importantly, find the courage, the willingness, the self-love to start where we are with ourselves and with each other and go from there. To be in conversations that let us live something new with the potentiality to create something new that we think could be fun and life enhancing and life generating and life enriching, whether it's joy or sorrow, and where perhaps, very much perhaps, real possibilities can be born. So the way to be here today, that letter is signed on behalf of all life, the directors and collaborators of Create a World. So the way I'm asking you, and Deb's asking you to be here today, is just to be self-stimulated and just to see what rises. That's our form of play, or as Georgia says, high play. Over to you, Deb.
I do have to learn that I can't be heard if I'm on mute.
That could be a slogan. Another t-shirt. T-shirt. I do need to learn I can't be heard if I'm on mute.
That's actually pertinent to life in this conversation. Well, so I'm going to walk through because you made a couple points and I jotted some things down. That's just my way. You said the diversity is already here, and that's really true. That is really, really true. And there's so much. There's just, unfortunately, I can't do every episode I've ever thought out and taken notes about all at once. But the appreciation of the diversity on so many levels, because we don't just mean, Republican versus Democrat or Republican and Democrat, or, black and white, or nature or city. We don't just mean that. We mean all of it. And everybody has their own rich tapestry of their existence. What over different shows and starting here to explore is, what is it to actually be in that diversity? Like, out past the us versus them, I'm going to say conditioning that's been part of human existence for eons. And there are a lot of places where that is not part of everyday life. And I imagine that that's true in, the first peoples, the Native Americans, in other indigenous communities. That's my imagination. And I know it's possible. So that's something to explore. What is it to appreciate and embrace the diversity? Now, I think you used the word unity somewhere in there when you were talking, Tantra. And for me, and I think Tantra and the rest of us who are here, who present on Create a World, unity doesn't mean we have to come to a point where we're all the same. We all think the same, believe the same. I think it may never, ever end that human beings do gravitate to like-minded or like being people. We just simply enjoy being around people similar to ourselves. That's just kind of the way of it, as far as I can tell right now. But unity does mean something about a way of being with each other that allows for all of it. So that's all I'm going to say about that right now, because that's something to explore really pretty deeply. And I do want to be honest with everybody. I do have an agenda. I do. And I have to really own that. My agenda is these items, is what is it to accomplish unity in the earth? What is that? I tend to be very optimistic in a real way, not a Pollyanna way. And I want to share that with the whole world. So what would it be for me to be in unity with someone who is a pessimist, or someone who I think very experientially and sometimes technically, especially in my field of psychology? But what is it for me to be with another psychologist who's very technical and very concrete? And I'm not. So I have an agenda. I definitely have an agenda for creating a world that I believe is possible. Just putting it out there. But having said all that, Tantra, I want to go back and pick up a couple words that I heard you read and that we use a lot, that I'm not sure we've gotten, those of us who work together in Create a World or in the field of Tantra Mat, and then that's spread out to a few other domains. We've gotten used to these words, but I started questioning if even we use these words just a little too flippantly or superficially. So I want to go back and pick them up and have you address them, if you would, please. Okay, is that all right? Okay, so the first word is embody. We're even here talking about embodying new worlds and so forth and so on. What do you say that word represents?
One of the things in the work I do, and also the work of the LOC Institute, Language of Creation Institute, is it's hard to put a descriptor on any word right now. One of the most fascinating things that we're just finishing a book, Mind of Creation, use the Mind of Creation. And so we went back and explored words and the origin of the word, like, for instance, the origin of the word, hold on, I'll get it, empathy, is totally used differently now. than it was used when the word was originated. And it's uncanny that the word only originated in early Middle English. There was no word for empathy before that time because it was either invisible or not considered an experience of value. We don't know. We weren't there. But the interesting thing about the origin of the word empathy in Middle English way back then is that it meant to be connected inwardly. Really a far cry from now. It's about Jesus. Protect yourself from everyone. Don't feel other people's feelings. Don't feel the world. So it's really, words are often enculturated according to their times, which we've discussed. So to embody, we're going to use it, not a descriptor, but an experiential state. And so to embody means to experience something as real in the body, not in the head. You know, people often say things to me like, I'm really having a bad day. And I'll go, really? And what people don't realize is the minute I go, really, the place you go to check is not your head. You go check your body. And people don't even notice it. Then there's a new science, may not be that new science for me, called somatics. Well, they made that distinction. They made that real for me in a way that I'd never been able to link it up to have it be real for me. So to embody means a different physical reality, a different physical world, a different physical experience, a new physical perception. When you look out, like my grandmother was born before cars or telephones. So when cars and telephones embodied, became physical, my grandmother had to figure out her world in a whole different way because there was a different physical embodiment that she was part of. So when we started Create a World, it's the foundation of why we don't mind kind of looking like idiots on the screen and we're not even coloring outside the lines. We don't even know what the coloring book looks like. I mean, we're way out there, but it's because we're beginning to notice physical shifts in reality. And we're beginning to notice our registers in our bodies. We would have once interpreted it one way, but now it doesn't seem to carry the same interpretation, but we don't know what that interpretation is. And the last thing I want to say about that is, I remember a long, long time ago, before the Language of Consciousness Institute took over the templates, the creation exercises. And I said, if you want to know what the language of consciousness is all about, what the creation templates are all about, they're about someday the word war will simply be missing in our vocabulary. And so will the word peace, because neither need to be distinguished, because they are no longer counter to each other. We are just in a different world. That's the key to embodiment. Embodying something we've never experienced before, never known before. And while we're busy in a ping pong match that's wearing us down and making us crazy, I read that the United States, 96% of the people interviewed says that the United States of America is suffering from mental depression. So it may be at the end of war and peace, and it may be something entirely different. That's called embodiment.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I didn't know that about the word empathy.
Yeah.
That once originally it reflected the internal state. Now it represents connection with another. But just talking about the word empathy, just comes up with the overwhelm of what it can be to be connected with another. That's really interesting. I'm going to have to make note of that for one
I'll send you the chapter.
Okay, please, for one of the psychology episodes, because that's really important to this whole idea of collective engagement. So that's cool. then, I'm just going to have to leave the rest about embodiment alone. I can't.
We aren't there yet,
We're not there yet, nor should we be. I'm sitting here
nor should we
thinking,
be.
if I'm going to practice what we're preaching on this show, then I need to sit with observing embodiment, observing what you've said, because I never noticed that if I say I'm having a bad day and you say really, then I go double check in my body. I never thought about that. Never noticed it. Wouldn't even have agreed with you before. So I now have to go observe, and what do I think, and how does that work? And
Yeah.
then there's certain things that have embodied, like the telephone. We don't even think about that. It has a physical existence, but it also has a non-physical existence because of the way it permeates our world and what that means about the structures of our world. So I'm just going to have to let it sit. And I invite everybody who's watching to do the same thing. Observe. What do you think about embodiment? What are you noticing? What are you feeling about it? What does it mean to you to start being aware of embodiment? And then we'll keep picking this up later. The second word you use, I use too, is field. I never thought about it. All the years I used the phrase field of psychology, for example. Then working within the field of Tantra Mat and all the different things, which we've never really described particularly here in this format, but you can find out more by either going to the Language of Consciousness Institute or tantramat.com. Those would be two places to go to find out more of what we mean when we just say that term. But the word field came to be, the more I paid attention to the words coming out of my mouth and other people's mouths, I realized that word means something new, something else, or unexamined, because I never thought what the field of psychology meant until that certain point. So what would you say regarding that, Tantra?
This one's actually pretty easy. Let's not do field because that has a thingness to it. Let's just talk about field phenomenon related to now, not related to, again, a description that'll now have to stay fixed in place. It's like, traditional dogma. I don't know if anybody knows, but the world we're living in now is not the same world we lived in when Abraham was here. They're still struggling with a lot of things that we're still struggling with. But how many of those was the field of perception, war, a God outside of us will come down and destroy our enemy? I mean, just look at it. It's just but that was the water that they were swimming in at that day. And it could have actually been their direct experience. There could have been angels that came down from on high. There could have been a burning bush. There could have been a ladder. We certainly don't talk about any of those experiences. And people like me who do have those experiences are often considered lunatics or not worth, of no value, because they don't have anything credible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am 76 years old. Don't I look a little perky? There may be something about staying inspirited and staying in touch with a larger field of reality that actually has me look this way. It may not be the roll of the dice. I promise you that. And it isn't like I haven't had trauma. And it isn't like I haven't been near death at least a couple of times. So
and it's not like you haven't had to wash dishes, put on your shoes,
yeah,
the whole spectrum of human experience.
Yeah, there's no separation. However, a field is the water you swim in. That's the easiest way to say it. The fish may think it's dying because it can't move its gills. but it's got dying because there is no water, or the water is toxic. So for me, field phenomenon is everything. Just to talk about the field of Tantra Mud, it's really risky, everyone, for us to say we come from the field of Tantra Mud, because it looks like, since my name's Tantra Mud, they worship me. Hardly, believe me. I'm so not worshipped. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. But it means that there are two principles that organize that, and we notice swimming in that water of Tantra, the so above, so below of creation, where it meets in physical form. And the Mad, which is harmony, symmetry, proportion, balance, beauty, and grace. There's something about, we discover that's the water we're swimming in, because oftentimes, not always, which is, I'm going to have to expound on this, not always, but there's like a spiritual being that is smelling the ethers, that is touching the spirit, that is in the principles of the sacred. And oftentimes those people are made into gurus. That's not my prediction of the future. My prediction of the future is that we all have our place. Today is everything operates on, we have a tradition of different principles. And today, Deb and I are in everything operates on behalf of everything else. And yet everything has a place. And so when you bring all the different compositions of what each of us has our own field of interest, that's another way to say it, ratcheted down one. This is the next one down from the fish think it's dying because its gills won't work. The next one down is the fish loves to swim among the coral and play in the coral. And, there's other fishes like to be out in the cold water, and other fishes like to jump up and splash boats and sometimes land on them. So each of us has our own expression of self, but in the larger field, the larger homeostasis, the larger ecology of our existence, if certain things go out of existence, like air, and we could be in trouble physically. But also, it's not just the air we breathe. It's the life force energy of even our prana and our chi. Those are field phenomena that allow us to exist here and be whole.
Yes. So let me say that back to you, if I can. I would say that at certain points of each of our existence, our world is what we live in is like the sum total of like when I was a kid and we would go on our little day trips as a family, and then driving home at night, and you see all the lights in the windows. And at some point I realized, oh, wow, each household, each family, it's like a whole universe in there. And then how much do each family think their household world is the whole world? That's their whole universe, maybe, whatever they do for their jobs, however many kids, going to school and work, all those components is like their world. That's the field of their existence. And then what I've also been noticing is that for some people, it's just a natural progression to go from that to, oh, now I'm at college and that extends my field. Now I'm here. Oh, wow, I just learned about a new religion. Oh, wow. And it keeps going out and out and out to include other things, other phenomena, not things, until through whatever mechanism we say, okay, this is it. This is my field. This is the field phenomenon of, let's just say, Deborah, and then something can come along to expand that. Once upon a time, I don't think it was that long ago, it would be often something jolting, like a new invention, the refrigerator, telephone, whatever. That, because when you said that, I was reminded of my grandmother. You know, she talked about what it was like when refrigerators came out, when the telephone got introduced, you know, all those things. War, other things that are very jarring, different experiences that force you into an expansion. I think we're in a phenomena now where the expansion can be much more voluntary, just by being on social media, just by being on I don't know, different things that let us travel around the world and in ways that weren't possible 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And in human understanding, that's pretty short. But even the internet and the social media, that still is like a bombardment or an insertion. I'm pretty careful, not because I don't want to expand my reality. Well, sometimes it is, but because I need to modulate the expansion. I need to adjust it, how fast or slow it happens for me. And sometimes I do choose what to include and what to exclude. I think that's also part of a field phenomenon, what to include and what to exclude.
I just want to add two things, Deb. One is, we started Create a World because of the signs of the time, not because we have a belief we want to insert into human, our belief system into the human system. So two things I want to say. We are finally global, except for very certain blacked out parts. Like right now, like Australia can't get on our WhatsApp thread, but we all can get on Telegram, for instance. And so there is this movement towards global communication, which has never been present before. And it's something I want you to either read or describe. But the phenomenon we find ourselves in, MetaPoint is what I want you to describe, but the phenomenon we find ourselves in, which is why Deb did her dissertation, then Deb and I are going to do another book, You as the Architecture of Creation. And I want to also explain about those books. It's interesting, we put books into the field of human being so that we can give out information, but maybe the new books aren't like that. I have no idea how many people can't author a book right now. And maybe the shift of books is for us in creation. By our working through, just like nobody had in the Greek days and the indigenous days, it was the story inside the community that began to influence the world. It wasn't trying to tell another community what they should believe or what's the truth. It was to establish the possibility of a field within which new realities can rise, not the right reality, just new realities.
Right.
And so even our identity is shifting as the need for being a collaborative thing. In New Mexico, it used to be 15 years ago, if there were no groceries brought in, no food brought in from another state, we would starve. Now we are self-sufficient. We are self-sufficient. So it's and so our idea of being an impoverished state, which is still the popular term for New Mexico, strangely enough, we don't feel so impoverished. So, because the identity is shifting, and then the things that are wrong are more wrong than ever, because the identity of what a human being is. And, I don't stay in an isolated suburb anymore. I travel the world. So my identity has a different context of existence than it would have had if I'd stayed in East Tennessee on my street for the rest of my life and been only influenced by what I saw on the TV, not by what I discovered by being in larger worlds. So Deb, what I want to do is have you describe meta point, and then I want to finish my thought pattern, and then I'll turn it over to you, okay?
All right. Before I do that, what you had me think of is maybe the nature of what constitutes information has changed. It isn't just data anymore. And I'll hopefully pick that back up some other day. All right, meta point. So I didn't bring the definition with me, which is elegant. So it's where various phenomena come together in a mutually enhanced manner. And the mutually enhancing is something we also use the term life enhancing. So that's what I would call a meta point. And what does that mean? In my life, I've noticed that very few things are actually separate from each other. Now, this pen is not physically part of my hand, although as much as I hold it, you'd think it would be. But there's a continuum. There's a continuum between my hand and the pen and the paper. There's a continuum. Meta point shows up in ways of being a lot, like continuum between, let's say, angry and happy. There's always some little, even if it's one speck of anger and mostly happy, there's always like a spectrum, a movement, a flow of interconnection, light and dark. There's never 100% dark, because there's always a star going somewhere or a candle or something. There's never 100% light, because there's shadows and shade. So yeah, does that get at it enough?
Yeah, and also the phenomenon that occurs in what Deb described is everything in that state of being, whether it's us as human beings or reality itself, everything has a strong, almost unerring tendency to move to the next greater whole.
Yeah.
Everything, nothing can move to the next greater whole in separation. Nothing. 0, 0, 0, 0.
Right.
It remains fragmented. It doesn't restore itself to being part of a larger constituted design of existence that, whether we believe it or not, we're still swimming in it. You cannot separate yourself from the stars. You cannot separate yourself from the ground you walk on. You cannot set molecularly, if just that simple, atomically, you can't separate yourself from the air or the sky, or you can't separate yourself from each other. And so one of the phenomenon that I'm asserting that Deb has come into this collaboration is this idea of the vital psyche and the identity that is no longer isolated from the rest of the world.
Right.
No longer isolated from itself, and no longer isolated from its own ideas of how it came into existence and what its existence is. So Deb, if you'd speak a little bit to what you're discovering there and your notions. I always love Deb's notions.
With regards to identity?
Absolutely.
Okay. I watched a show a while back, Anne with an E, I think. It was a TV show and about a young girl, an orphan, who was adopted into this family. And she was adopted into, I think it was a TV version of Anne of Green Gables. Anyway, the point is, she was adopted into the family to be a farmhand, actually. So one of the scenes that was she was very flamboyant. She loved to read, very dramatic, very, she felt things very deeply. She was always curious. So everything she talked about half the time was to explore and what if and why. So, but that was really unfamiliar to the woman, was a brother and sister. The woman who, they adopted her, she was used to a very quiet life, she'd get up, do her chores, just do it all over again. And that was life. And there was this episode where the young lady was talking about, well, why this, why that, and you could be this and you could be that, and why do you think of yourself like that? And it was so amazing to watch this woman come to realize, ever thought about herself or life beyond get up, take care of her designated chores, which were defined because she was a woman. Unless there was a crisis, she didn't cross those lines. And she just never thought about it. She never thought about who she was as a person. It was the most amazing, well done scene. And I think that each of us has a sense or experience of who we are based on whatever accumulation of information, experience, data, because that can include, I was born here, this date, this year. And like we were just saying, for our grandmothers, that meant a world without TVs, televisions, refrigerators, whatnot. So the world was a certain way, who they associated with, what their schooling was like, all those things, and every experience you have adds up to a sense of self, conscious or not conscious. But there's a lot of ways that in my development as a psychologist, I began to notice how redacted or reduced and we are. For example, in that situation, her roles and participation in life was defined by, this is what women do. Well, that's been true well past the 1880s when that show was set in, or, men do this, or little boys are like this, or those are very, very simplistic examples of putting a lid on an identity, that other factors put a lid on your identity. Then there's just a lot about what we think, how we think, and what we steer off of that also puts a lid on our identity. And for me, and from my studies, identity and personality are not the same, but you can't exactly separate them either. Personality is more how you express who you are, what your sense of self is, such as extrovert or introvert. Those are two very simple ways to get personality across, but they're you can't separate it from who the person knows they are. I feel like I'm missing something, Tantra. So am I getting at what you were interested in?
No, I think you're unpacking something in a way that I want it unpacked, because I think there are a lot of people I know from my clients that call me for either coaching or other types of engagement, that there is a common question, and two of them. One is I now know one statement, one declaration, and that is, I really need to know who I am. That's like there's a declarative. Well, I've worked 57 years in my industry number one, and that question wasn't real for 50 years ago. 50 years
Right.
ago was
Right.
how do I be a good mother? How do I be a good wife? How do I get the right job? It was a very different thing. In fact, I used to say, all I can do is make people comfortable in their prison. That was my quote. So that would have been about 1970 to somewhere around 1985 in real time. And then in 1979, there was a year where people were having serious panic attacks, but they were healthy people with good jobs, mostly women, they had good jobs, they had good businesses, and they couldn't understand why they were suddenly having panic attacks. The strange thing is then in 1997, we had another bout of this undercurrent of panic attacks. Only this time was more about, I need to know what's real for me. I need to know what's real.
Yeah.
Not what the world tells me. So that was the second shift. But now we're in these 5 years, which, for me got predicted a long time ago, between 2021 and 2022 and 2027, where the very foundation of our existence is falling out from under us. And so everything we tied into to identify as being a credible value or even a credible contribution is cracking beneath our feet. So now the common conversation, which is very, very distinct, is I can't figure out what to do, and I can't figure out how to be. And my constant response is, that's because we don't know yet. So this whole idea of coming back to only living in the moment or just be here now, it's not like a coping skill for separation. Well, I guess it might be actually, but it's not, the importance isn't, it is a coping skill for what's happening. It's because all we have is now. And we are the now within which new ideas of self and new ideas of new dynamics of reality are forming.
Yeah, that's what. So I would go back in my perception and terminology back in the 70s was like a system-wide opening where people were noticing, like that woman in that show, I identity. I have an identity separate from, or not separate, maybe distinct from or made up of my roles. Wow, I might be somebody beyond my role, or wow. So there's a beginning of, I would say, opening to consciously owning one's existence, one's sense of self. And that was a pretty novel idea, even though there were pockets, like all the activity of the 60s, and there were pockets of people trying to crack that open, pockets of people who were present to that, and they were moving with something.
It's like I always
took a
say, we cracked the nut, but the seed didn't plant fully.
Beautiful. Then I would say in what you're talking about, the 90s and the early 2000s, because I remember that time we were working together in the early days, and you would talk about people in their prisons. But that's a redaction. That's a way of people being kept within a very certain encapsulation of being. Then came the social part, and what's my purpose? Same parallel phenomenon, just at a more social, interconnected level. And most people called it, what's my purpose? Who am I? I need to know who I am in the world. Then what I think, even though the years of COVID shoved so many of us into isolation, and there were so many ramifications from that, what I think got activated, honestly activated, is how creative people can be in maintaining their associations, And now we're looking at who am I as a collective? You rip collective out, and the possible, the ways of just going about our kind of unconscious, automatic, get up, go to work, all the different ways we connected without paying attention. Like suddenly you don't get up and go to work anymore. You don't see people on the subway. You aren't chatting over while standing in line to get your cup of coffee. All the different, very subtle and not so subtle ways of interconnecting and having us feel busy, feel part of something. We now have to be consciously aware of that, and people are consciously reconstructing that for themselves. So I think that's identity at this next level of who are we? And then of course it really threw a lot of people into who am I as a unique and individuated being. That really pulled the ripcord on that one for a lot of people. And what gives my life meaning, which is a little different from what is my purpose, is part of this thing of who am I as part of the collective. I'm not going to just get up and go into the workplace automatically because that's just the way it was done. Now there's something else, and I'm not quite sure what that is. Is what I'm experiencing people saying. So we're in a state of observing and bringing ourselves to the still point as we observe and register and let our awareness open up into what is this? Who am I as part of it? And I think people are just beginning to discover that there's not a collective out there. There's a collective that we form and perpetuate. And the beauty and creativity of that potential is humongous. Absolutely humongous. I can't even say how humongous I think it is. But we don't know what's on the other side. None of us do, except by a kind of inner sight that I would say is kind of like that definition of mystic in the beginning of what Tantra read in the beginning. Many, many, many people are having a sense through lots of different means, and they're having a sense of what can be out beyond the brittleness of certain distinct pigeonholed definitions of ourselves. And I think that's where I'm going to stop with that, because that's a big topic. But we're just observing.
Yes, I want to also add that, what we're the community based doesn't have anything to do with history. It has to do with, can you see me? Can you hear me? Can I see you? Can I hear you? And then can you love me? And can I love you? And it's a very new baseline. It's always been there underneath, but now it is what has the survival of our species have the possibility of existing, even in small areas of community. Maybe the whole world will break apart, but different communities will establish themselves as part of a new norm. We have to go. I have to make a trip. Thank you, Deb. Thank you all for being with us. We love